Close your eyes for a second while I open the house. Before me in the east, Nephthys, behind me in the west, Isis, on my right hand in the south is Set, and on my left hand in the north is Horus. For above me shines the body of Nuit, the star goddess, and below me extends the ground of Geb. And in my centre abideth the great hidden God. It's a sad day to be talking about some of these topics, so I'd like to dedicate this to Alan Hemming, who was killed by Islamic State yesterday. Those of you who heard me speak in Reading a few months ago may have seen, I showed this film there as well. I didn't show the whole film, but it's such a fascinating film, and it's well worth seeing even a little bit of it again. It's very unusual. It's actually given to me by the person I showed you the picture of. A lot of this stuff that happened to me in Egypt was kind of coincidence and serendipity and whatever. I mean, he sent his computer off to be repaired, and it came back with this film on it. And he said, you'd be interested in this film. And you can see it's very, very fuzzy, right? It's been copied many, many times. I don't know if you can find this on the internet. It's in French, but that's not going to matter, right? I just want to, it demonstrates very, very clearly, I'm going to show two extracts from this film. It demonstrates very, very clearly the rationality of the methods that I use to learn something about Egyptian magic, ancient Egyptian magic, from the local people who actually live in Luxor. I'm using a technique that's got a posh name called archaeological memory, which means you can reconstruct Egyptian magical means by looking at the people who are still practicing the same techniques in Luxor today. Which is a controversial idea. But in fact, even in the academic sphere now, which is where the term archaeological memory comes from, there are more and more examples of proving that the locals are actually practicing Egyptian magic one way or another. And you have the textual sources of Egyptian magic, but you can sort of get direct teachers there. I'm not saying he's a teacher, as I say, he's not really a teacher. You can find people who want to do it with you, want to do magic with you for one reason or another. Anyway, this film, it's by a famous French archaeologist who was in charge of the excavations at the Temple of Karnak. I think it's made in about 1960. It's quite an old film. And essentially what he's doing, if people have ever been to Luxor, right in the centre of this modern city is an ancient pharaonic temple, temple of Amun-Min, right, a phallic form of Amun. And if you know, so you've got Amun, the sort of all-father, but he's always shown with an erection. And the city itself, its ancient name means City of the Sceptre. And in some way, if you think about what a sceptre is, in some ways, Luxor is still the city of the sceptre, right? It's still a big sex thing there. But he shows us the Temple of Luxor, and he shows us some very interesting carvings on there, and you won't understand what he's saying, but essentially he's saying, look, this describes a ritual that was conducted in this temple thousands of years ago in the pharaonic times. And the army came and they marched up and down, the pharaonic army, and people had a big feast and slaughtered lots of animals, and there was martial arts competitions between the local men to prove their prowess, and there were images of the goddess paraded around. All the kind of things are described in this frieze. And then he tells you that right in the middle of the temple is a mosque, very old mosque, built into the temple itself. And then so he shifts then from describing, he walks out of the temple and essentially says, the rituals that are described on the wall of the temple are now performed as he walks out outside the temple there, or essentially in the temple. So the very same rituals that are described on the temple walls are, at the moment of the film is made, then reenacted by the local population. Thousands and thousands of people gathering to do this ritual and this festival just outside the gates, and in the mosque, which is a kind of Islam there is kind of different to the stuff that we're kind of getting shoved in our direction at the moment, but it's much more liberal, not fanatical, but more Sufi based and whatever. But anyway, so show the first few minutes of the film, so we'll see that. So it's rather an extraordinary film, I think. And it's not just interesting sort of intellectually or whatever. There are all sorts of techniques, even in the film. There are all sorts of things shown. Sometimes you don't really know you're looking at you couldn't tell whether this was a Muslim ritual or a voodoo ritual, to be honest. The kind of things there that you might see on a film about voodoo happening, all sorts of ritual stuff. In my group, we do a lot of work now with using some of these material, using well, I'll describe all the different aspects of it, this sort of trance work and dance, especially dance, and in this tape there's a rather interesting dance, which I really like. So you can kind of see how they did the description of it. Okay, so the topic today is, broadly speaking, concerns demons, inverted commas. A demon, what is a demon? Or what is the difference between a demon and a monster? You ever thought about that? Can anybody think about the difference between demon and a monster? Okay. You got an idea? What's it?
A demon is something you can constrain to do something for you.
Right.
Or you can ask, or you can get something out of it, whereas a monster is just something that is generally not good and can be run away.
Okay. Everybody agree with that? Okay, my word, I haven't got something as complicated as that. A demon, then, as I mentioned before, strictly speaking, is an animal head on a human body. right? And that image of the animal head on a human body, usually a goat's head on a human body, is very, very old. It goes back right to the Stone Age art and everything like that. It's almost like as soon as we became human beings, we started seeing these creatures with our own bodies and a human head, so animal head on them, one sort or another. So it's some sort of composite being. Essentially, a monster is a human head on an animal body. And the monsters don't go back quite as far, interestingly enough. There's a particular moment in our history where monsters kind of erupt into our popular consciousness, perhaps in Mesopotamia, early Mesopotamian ritual. Pazuzu in the film The Exorcist is a good example of a human head on this kind of monstrous animal body with wings and animal feet. So I don't know. So there is a difference between a demon and a monster. Monsters are more modern in a way, and maybe that's something to do with something that happened to us at that point in our history, that monsters started appearing in our dreams, whereas previously people don't seem to have had that encounter. I've been looking, as I say, at various aspects because of the clues in something like the film. I've been looking for clues, ways of reconstructing Egyptian magic from survivals amongst the Muslim population and the Sufi population, the Coptic population. And I've shown why that's a viable point of view, and there are lots and lots of articles now written about other things that show that this is the way to go. You can actually find virtually living practitioners, if you know what they're called, of the Egyptian magic, or you can use and reconstruct that. Okay, we'll show the second bit of second bit of film just before we put the PowerPoint on and show the pictures. The second bit of film, can you put the sound up? See, that is, for me, a kind of quite interesting Crowley as well, and Thelema. That's what a Thelemic ritual should look like. And one of the chants they do, obviously, we're talking to some extent about Islam, and that might be taboo for some people, especially on such a difficult day. But I don't know. I think the magic community needs to do this. I mean, could I ask, as people here, if any of you, I should say, I'm not a Muslim, right? I'm a pagan and a magician. And the people in Egypt that I work with know that. I mean, they say they hope that I will convert to Islam, you know. I mean, they say, what are you into as we're at the mountain? What is it? Tell me exactly what it is that what do you believe in? You know, are you a kind of mystic or what? So they're kind of winkling me out, but they would like me to become a Muslim. But I said, no, that's not going to happen, but I'm respectful. I think it's quite important that we're respectful. I know there's a tendency amongst our community and everybody wants to have a go at the Muslims at the moment. I mean, it's kind of natural, I suppose, with terrible things. But also in general, as we know, right, in our community, because we're kind of Thelemites and pagans, and we've got a kind of funny history with, in terms of the Abrahamic faith, we kind of have a tendency to slag them off, right, and say, you know, you're all idiots and you're inhibited and blah blah. But in a way, that we've got to let that go. We've got to grow up as in our religion. We've got to build bridges, and it's worth doing because there's stuff that that community needs to know, and we can learn from them. So I was going to say, has anybody here read the Quran? You've read the Quran? Or looked at the Quran? You've looked at the Quran. I'm not going to go on about too much about the Quran, but that's good. But I would say the Quran is a magical book. It definitely is. That's why there is so much energy and violence at the moment. In a way, the stuff that we're seeing in the world shows you the potential for that sort of magic. And, you know, obviously I was a little bit worried, being a pagan for a long time, whether there'd be a problem for someone like me in a Muslim country, being an open pagan, whatever. But I was told, no, the magic is Quranic. Magic is in the Quran. There's no objection to the practice of magic. In fact, this is the stuff I'm doing is not going to be Quranic, incidentally, but it's one of the most important streams of magic in the Middle East. Just like the Bible, I suppose, there are whole chapters here on demons, right? There's a whole chapter on the jinn and demons in this book. I'm not saying that they're all bastards either, saying that the jinn are useful. Not all of the jinn, the demons, are bad things. They have their uses, which I'll talk about. And in fact, if you remember, this is the Penguin edition. If you do have one, you have to treat it. And you know, Muslim people, they don't like you to disrespect this book in any way. So they don't like you to write shopping notes in it or anything like that, or just leave it on a counter or something like that, like we treat our normal books. They like you to treat it like you would Abramelin or a magical book, as if it does have magical power. And if you look at the beginning of it, you probably haven't. So the beginning of the book has got 3 special letters, Aleph, Lam, Min. Nobody knows. No Muslim can explain to you what those letters mean. No ordinary Muslim. It's straight from the beginning. This is a strange magical book. And in fact, lots of magical practitioners use stuff from this book as magic. And it is full of rituals for protection and whatever. So it's quite important to kind of at least be aware of those things. Now, obviously, when we're talking about Islamic magic, well, we kind of know this already, right? That it's there in our books, sort of, isn't it? That all of the grimoires and all of the books on yoga and books on astrology, our number system, all the sort of intellectual wealth of the classical world is mediated to us, comes to us via Islam, via Arabic translations of these classic books. So we kind of know that they are part of our history as much as anybody else. Sometimes we focus a little bit too much on Hebrew Kabbalah, and we forget that an awful lot of this stuff has come to us from translations from the medieval times and from medieval Islam. And they weren't just theoretical, they were practitioners of magic in the medieval period, and their books on magic are better than our books. They're more detailed and they're more effective. In fact, early European archaeology used Islamic magical books on treasure hunting to find pharaonic tombs, which is they didn't want this stuff to be too well known at the time, but that's what they use. That's still acknowledged today, that treasure hunting Islamic books, because treasure hunting in Islam is a religious activity. It proves your faith. Like psychic question, it proves the power of magic. If you find some object on your quest, it's the same. It says in the Quran. It's in the Quran. If it's in the Quran, you're okay. It says that when the Hebrews left Egypt, they left their property buried in the ground. most of it. They couldn't take it all with them. They left their houses and their wealth buried in the ground. So it's buried in the ground. It says that in the Quran. Therefore, if you can find the stuff buried in the ground, you prove the truth of the Quran. Therefore, it's religiously good thing to do. So that's why it's very common there. But obviously, this is a very ambiguous activity. Very, very ambiguous. Because as we know, it's what's the difference between treasure hunting and grave robbing? Or tomb robbery. We sort of tolerate the idea of treasure hunting in graveyards and psychic questing, because why do we do that? Because we think they're not going to really find anything much. But as you know, in Egypt, you only have to dig below your feet a few feet and you'll find something. You know, it's just everywhere. And that's a problem for an ambiguity. So, after the revolution, I kind of felt easier about going to Egypt, to be honest. And now it's kind of strange. It's much more edgy than it ever was, because it's so wide open. It's like the Wild West. And by one reason or another, I stumbled into these group of people. And I should say, you might not recognize this, but this is a part of what's called the Theban Necropolis, which is a holy mountain. Holy, H-O-L-Y. Holy mountain in Egypt that's been holy since forever. And everybody wants to be buried on this. And this is Dru Abu al-Naga, which means the arm. It's a village called the arm of the wise man of the village. And once upon a time, you can see, up on the hill, you can see tombs. You see that? Tombs. And then there's a village built on top of it, essentially. And some of these are what's called tomb houses. The houses where your basement is a tomb, a pharaonic tomb. It's an Arab house where your basement is a pharaonic tomb. And this is quite important to us. If people read the Greek magical papyri in translation, right? The Bet's book, right? Everybody's kind of poring over at the moment. Which, even though it's called the Greek magical papyri in translation, it originally comes from this area. The person who wrote that collection of spells comes from this area. And the person who found the book, the modern edition of the book, he lived there. He lived in one of these houses. It's like Petrie, the father of Egyptian archaeology, because he's kind of like us. Well, I'm not saying it's like, maybe he wouldn't do this. When he wasn't digging up Egyptian tombs, he used to live in Egyptian tombs. Yeah? He set up his base, rather than building a house, he said, because he was a bit mean, right? You know this. He never cooked any food. He always used to take tins of Spam. And they would just eat cold Spam, or whatever it was, for their dinner every night. After a whole day's excavation of the site, they would, the whole lot, his wife and everything, they would just eat out of tins. It's kind of weird. And then at the end of the excavation season, they'd bury the leftover tins in the ground. It was so mean, you see, so that they could get them next year. So they're not even having fresh stuff. I mean, but he's an incredible person. But rather than build a house to live in, he just, we just live in one of the empty tombs. And so that's a very common practice, and I think locals as well have got into that idea. If it's an empty tomb, why not live in it? But that has consequences to the people who live in the tombs. There's the spirits of the tombs are still there, right? That's what the locals say. They have to. Part of the reason they're good at magic is because they live in a graveyard. Essentially, they live in one of the largest graveyards in the world. And if you do that, and it starts initiating Egyptians who are the masters of magic and the spirit world, you know there's going to be full of spirits, and it is. Anyway, so there's the village with these people, part of the village. Next slide. And there's a view of it. These are the houses of these are tomb houses, you see. This is Abu al-Naga, this hill. There's lots of tombs there, tombs of the nobles. All under here. This is an old graveyard with Arab houses on top of it. Yeah? And this is if you've ever been there, this is the road that leads up to, I think this is right, to the Temple of Hatshepsut. Next slide. This is it now. Right? Completely destroyed. 3 years ago, before the revolution, it coincides. When I first went to Egypt, I went to a lecture at the Mummification Museum, where they have an academic report from all the teams excavating, all the foreigners excavating in Luxor, report on their research. And rather gleefully, the report was that one of the famous tombs was now available to be looked at again because all the Arab houses had been destroyed. Ha ha. But don't worry, we've rehoused them 3 miles away, and we're going to tidy up this so the tourists don't have to encounter the locals. Right? This is a pattern now. They don't have to encounter the locals, and they haven't got their houses on top of the tombs, so us Western archaeologists can get in there, and of course our religion is science, and we never do any damage, and you know, we're not interested in treasure. We're just purely scientific. And so the government then, Mubarak, betrayed the locals and destroyed their village. And you can see what's underneath. There's the rubble of the houses, and then these are entrances to tombs. I mean, this is a difficult issue. It is difficult because the things that they discover in the tombs are very, very interesting. Anyway, then you have the revolution and demolitions stop. This is just when I started going there to meet these people. And UNESCO said the destruction of the Arab village was the worst cultural catastrophe of the last few years. The destruction of the Arab village was the worst cultural catastrophe. It was a complete fuck up, basically, because they didn't know, you know, they didn't really look into who these people were. Essentially, you've destroyed the houses of the people who built the tombs, in some sense. Or certainly they have a longer relationship with magic and the tombs and the Egyptian religion than the archaeologists do. And they have unknown knowledge. So UNESCO kicked up a huge fuss about this, and further demolitions have been stopped for the time being. But obviously there's a lot of bad feeling there. And one of the archaeological associations, because there was a lot of people complaining about this, not just, there's obviously there are archaeologists who are just, I don't know, they're imperialist. Basically, they're imperialist and they're racist, and they don't think there's anything to learn from this. But there are other archaeologists, like that lady on the telly and whatever, who realise that these people are memory. They have a memory. They may even be the original people who built the tombs in the first place. You should check that out before you knock their villages down. So now there's a rescue archaeology mission, rather strangely, financed by the American university to do rescue archaeology on the Arab houses, which have only been knocked down for 2 years. And they're financing now to re-excavate the houses just in case there was something there that maybe they should have looked at. And this has happened lots of times before in Egyptian archaeology. In the temple at Medinet Habu, which is nearby, all of the stuff that wasn't like posh stone, the mud brick stuff, which is older, was all completely cleared out before they started the excavation. They just bulldozed it out, basically. And people said later, it would have been quite handy to look at that stuff. But it's all gone now. And that quite often happens. Okay, next slide. So you can see these were houses and these are tombs behind and underneath the houses. You can walk through this. Well, no, technically if you go there as a tourist, they don't like you walking through this area. They don't like you to go there. But because I have friends there now, I can they took me through this. And this is the easiest way up onto the mountain as well. Okay, so we're up on the mountain. This is quite green and agricultural. That's the Nile Valley. We're just on the edge of the desert. That's where people buried their dead there. Okay, keep that. So in the rescue archaeology that is taking place on the villages that are lost, including the house of my friend, his family house was destroyed. And the football pitch was destroyed, and all the different things there. It's an interesting story in itself. They found fragments of. These are copies. This is their work. Their work is making copies of things that they sell to tourists. They're very, very accurate. Well, it depends how much you pay. If you pay top rate, then you'll get a completely accurate copy of a pharaonic thing that nobody will be able to tell who did it. To sort of slightly less things. So that's their job. So a broken piece there. And these scribbled bits of paper is actually a love spell. And it's a love spell that invokes the power of the constellation the Plough to deal with the problems of fertility and love of a particular person. All right, it looks like a scribble, but kind of the person who wrote that spell, I may have shown this before, but I can't say I've tracked them down, but my friend, he's tracked down the magical specialist who did this work. And I'll show some other stuff of his, hopefully in a minute. So even with just a quick look through the rubble, they found that the people of the village are magical practitioners there, or they're using magical specialists to do their work. Okay, in the golden age of Islam, I've mentioned that people used all sorts of texts. Okay. in the film, right, with the dance, right, which is I work on lots of different dances now from this tradition. And I'm suggesting, you see, one of the things they chant is Allah, right? Obviously. And if you think about it, if you're into Crowley and stuff like that, Allah is the god of Crowley, essentially, Al and La, as we know, although one way or another. And Crowley was, of all the influences on Crowley from that, Islam is probably one of the strongest influences on Crowley. Lots of his rituals are full of prayers from the Sufi tradition. And he had a huge respect, I think, for Islam. He would probably been better off being a Sufi if he'd have listened to his secret chief, Aiwas, and returned to Egypt and actually looked for the tomb of Ankh-Khafre-Khonsu, or looked for the traces of Ankh-Khafre-Khonsu. He would have found himself in Luxor, in ancient Thebes, and the history of Thelema would be a bit different. Anyway, as we know, we've got in Thelema we have the mantra Lashtal, which is La, Al, and Set in the centre. So rather than do it, I guess, I don't know, how would people feel about doing? You probably wouldn't want to do Allah, would you? It might be a bit much. But so that brainwave, you could do Lashtal to that, and to that dance. See, Thelemic magic is too static. It doesn't have enough movement and dance. Crowley was a dancer, and Victor Neuburg was a dancer, but they've kind of a little bit lost that tradition. So this is one of the things I've kind of learned from that. I don't know, maybe someone will explain to me later that even see, Crowley is supposed to kind of get rid of all religions, isn't he, in the Book of the Law? He's sort of. In the third book of the Book of the Law, he kind of says, I'm going to trash them all, and peck so-and-so's eyes out, and God knows what. And I flap my wings in the face of Muhammad and blind him. But some people think it doesn't mean what it says. It means something else. It means he's kind of doing something with that. Okay, so I'll go specifically to the topic of demons. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so this is a view from the Theban necropolis, which you can walk. So this is a holy mountain, shaped like a pyramid. And if you go right to the top, which is quite a climb, but you can do. There's a beach. There's a prehistoric beach on the top of the mountain, and you can find seashells there, and it's obvious that people have noticed that, right, for a long time. So it's one of the reasons why it's such a special magical mountain is the fact that it has this incredibly archaic, because it's in the middle of a desert, and yet it looks as if it ought to be by the sea. There's a temple of Hatshepsut. Next one. There's a view from the top. Someone said it looks like a kind of IKEA flat pack. Hatshepsut temple. It is very modern looking. The Egyptian aesthetic is can be very modern. Okay, next one. Can't remember. Valley of the Kings. So the way to get to the Valley of the Kings is to walk over the mountain, which we did. We do quite a lot. It's quite doable if you're reasonably fit, and if you're very fit you can go further. You can go a long walk through the mountains. It's quite straightforward, as long as you don't get caught in a storm. I don't know if I've got the right pictures now, but I'll show you later. Okay, next one. Okay. So Islam came to Egypt with the Arab invasion in about the 7th century AD. And as you might expect, when the Arabs arrived, they found that the place had its own system of demons and of angels and all the rest. And the system that they found, which is part Coptic and part of survival from the ancient Egypt, is the Egyptian system is itself quite contradictory. Lots of it would be very difficult for me to kind of resolve the Egyptian system of demons into a nice, neat hierarchy and system. It doesn't quite work like that, because you kind of think the further I go back in time, the simpler things are going to get, but it isn't quite like that. Sometimes the further back you go in time, the more complicated it gets. So that makes me think that systems of demons and spiritual entities are never going to be nice and neat. And maybe we should probably abandon the idea, if we ever had it, that in our own modern dealings with spirits, we shouldn't look for neatness. We should entertain contradictory patterns of entities in our system, because it's always been like that. Nobody's ever been able to resolve these systems into one thing. And that's why I think, say, the Islamic system as well is already complex. Is itself complex. It's not simple. Islam, you don't hear about this very much. We kind of get one thing, but Islam divides the world up into 3 basic categories of human beings: the jinn, right, from which we get the word genie, the jinn, who are creatures of fire, and angels being kind of messenger things, really. The jinn and the human beings have free will. They can choose. And the jinn can choose to be Muslim or Christian or wherever they want to be. And some of the jinn are for us, for Westerners. They help us. They help the unbelievers do things, which is rather strange, I know. Angels are sort of automata. They are bearers of structure. They maybe in some senses are not such useful things to encounter, because they kind of have their role, their thing that they do, which is to give the message, or if they represent a particular element or whatever, they do that, and they're not really supposed to go outside of that script. And if an angel goes outside of the script, you might think that it's probably not an angel that you're dealing with. You're dealing with the jinn, who do often masquerade as angels, because they like things like that. So that's the Islamic view, but it's not as simple as that, because Islam also preserves all sorts of other sets of spirits, including spirits from the pharaonic times. So these people who lived in the mountain, they regularly encounter spirits of tombs who are pharaonic shaitans. They're called pharaonic, a type of spirit called a shaitan, from which we get our name Satan, of course, but it's got a kind of more general meaning there, of a class of spirits called a shaitan, usually a little bit bit malign. Difficult to say, but there's a particular type of shaitan called a pharaonic shaitan, which is, it's a shaitan, it's a dangerous spirit that lives in pharaonic tombs, and you have to know certain bits of magic to counteract it, otherwise it'll kill you. More likely, it won't kill you, but it'll kill the first person in the tomb. It'll kill someone in the family, usually the children. As you know, if you study some of the early stuff in the Greek magical papyri, they talk about you use children as spirit mediums in the ancient world. I don't know if that's a mistake in translation, but certainly there's a tradition that grows up from that children are more sensitive to these things and you should use them as spirit mediums. And in the modern world, people do use children to contact pharaonic shaitans and tell them where the tomb is, and as a result of which the child sometimes does get ill and die. Or they need another type of specialist practitioner to come and deal with the possession of the child to stop them dying. Very dubious morally, I admit. So they have these other spirits from they also have ghosts. They have a sort of other class of spirits called ghosts, and then there are spirits of other foreigners who like the Sudanese or whatever, who happen to come in there, and they have all their systems. So they have a very messy system in Islam. They have a very messy system in pharaonic Egypt. Essentially, two messy systems equal each other. Must be the same, really. Okay, there are three types of practitioners, basically, but this isn't true either, because I can think of loads more. As it was explained, there are some practitioners who can read and some practitioners who can't read, and if they're clever and they can read and they've studied the Quran at school, they can use the Quran as their magical book, and they do things. But there's another type of practitioner called Master of the Rod. A Master of the Rod is the kind of top of the league, if you like, for this sort of stuff. He knows all the ancient spirit names and how to subdue them. The key figure, who is the ultimate Master of the Rod? The ultimate Master of the Rod is Solomon. Solomon is the Master of the Rod. So essentially they use a form of Solomonic magic. In fact, if you want to know something about Solomonic magic, that is big stuff, big deal in the Middle East Solomonic magic. And in fact, even in the Quran, rather great story about Solomon in the Quran, lots of stories about Solomon in the Quran. The question is put to the Prophet, peace be upon him, why is it that when Solomon died, that the jinns, as Solomon used his rod, he has power over the jinn, and he sets them to work in Egypt, in Luxor, essentially, quarrying stone for temples all over the Middle East. And when Solomon dies, thousands of years ago, whenever it was, the jinn carry on working. They don't stop working. And so they asked the Prophet, why don't the jinn notice that he's died? And the answer is, in the Quran, that when he died, he was kept standing up and resting on his rod. And so he's there, standing on his rod, rotting away. And the jinn don't notice he's dead for thousands of years until Muhammad comes along and said, he's dead. No, Allah sends a worm to eat his staff. And it burrows into his staff, the termites. The staff rots away, the corpse flops on the floor, and all the jinns say, he's dead. And then they stop doing it. Now, that's a fantastic piece of folklore on any level, right, to find in a holy book about Solomon, and also this lovely story about why the jinn carry on. Solomon developed his system of the 7 charms. So the number 7 is the sacred number, and although some of these systems like the Testament of Solomon and whatever look very complicated, the essence of the system as practiced there resolves into 7 basic charms or spells, which Solomon learned essentially in the Egyptian desert from the jinn, who, while he was on a desert pilgrimage, he managed to capture the jinn and extort this secret from them. The second category of practitioners in modern Egypt are those who are possessed by spirits. If you're possessed by a spirit in this tradition, then you'll often become a magical practitioner and a wonder worker. Then your spirit will possess you, will give you the power. It may completely drive you mad. I mean, there are strangely, there are naked ascetics, right, in Egypt, or there were in the 1930s, people who won't wear clothes, which, if you think about that society where they're supposed to be so uptight and everything, the idea of a naked guy just living his entire life, he won't put clothes on because he's too nuts to do that. But they say, well, he's nuts, he's possessed by the spirits, and nothing you could do about it. But as it happens, he's very, very good at curing headaches, or whatever it might be. He's got a magical power to compensate for his madness. So the spirit that possesses him gives him a little bit something back to make up for it. So there's a transaction. And the third category are dabblers in spells, which is probably a category I fall into, I think they'd say. I'm a dabbler, one way or another. Okay, so the category... Can you carry on a little bit? Oh, look. Okay, next one you have to flick through quickly. This is a place called the Western Valley. If you go to Egypt now, you can often be completely on your own and deserted, right? And this is, so you've got the Valley of the Valley of the Kings, and then you've got another valley, which is also called the Valley of the Monkey, or the Western Valley, which has got, at the moment, it's got about 3 tombs they've found in there, and one of them is open to the public. So you can walk up there as well. Very, very preternaturally quiet place, right? Very scary. And you've got to kind of imagine this a few years ago when there was no electricity in Egypt. They didn't have so many street lights. And it's the same now, actually, because most of the street lights and everything have been trashed. Whereas they've illuminated, a few years ago, they illuminated the whole Acropolis. All the light bulbs have been stolen now. So it's pitch black again. And when you're in the pitch black, demons like darkness, right? That's the way they look at it. The best way to get rid of an unpleasant entity is turn the lights on, as we know, or light a lamp. Plato says spirits don't like light; it drives them away. Okay, so one of the things about this thing, the locals don't like to go there. They don't like this valley very much. They have to work there because there's a tomb. So we got to this point and Ayman said, you go on. Go on by yourself. I don't want to go any further. He said, but you'll like it. You'll like this. But I don't fancy it. So we go a bit further into this valley. And he said, the reason why they don't, next slide, they don't like this is because there's a shaitan lives here. There's a spirit of some sort lives in this valley, a scary one. And the guards, normally they crash out here in the tombs, or there's a little house that they sleep in. They won't do it here. They won't stay because there have been fatalities. It touches people, if you know what I mean. It pulls their clothing. I think actually what this is, I thought it was originally, when I first showed this lot, I thought it was going to be one of the shaitan spirits, which is a type of jinn. But when they told me more about the story, that the first guy who died was one of the guards, and they have to spend their shift. They work all day and they sleep up in the valley. They don't go home. He was having problems at home with his wife and his family, and he shot himself in the valley in the middle of the night. And in Islam, suicide is kind of like a sin, as it is in a lot of these Abrahamic religions. But you're not eternally damned if you commit suicide in this tradition. But what you do is you have to repeat, every night you have to repeat your death. So essentially, you go on this cycle of endlessly shooting yourself every night, committing suicide every night. You have to relive the suicide every night until such a point in which you're forgiven, or some local magical practitioner gets you let off the hook, and then you can carry on and be reborn or whatever. So, which is very like some aspects of ghost lore that you find in the classical tradition, where the manner of your death, the ghost sort of reprises the manner of their death over and over again as a sort of automata. So I guess this is it, what this might be. Although, to really test this out, next slide, you have to go there. People do go there. Lutz was there. Next one. And spend a night. But I don't know, I'm quite at the bottle to do this yet, to be honest. But I kind of think it is a spirit in Tormod. And so then the later people who go there, they encounter this ghost and it scares them to death. They don't want to stay. And the people there are kind of used to stuff that we wouldn't do. And yet they won't go here. They wouldn't stay here the night. He wouldn't come with me. Okay. But you can see it's a very, lots of little kind of canyons and stuff and shadows. This is the shadow. You definitely feel there's a power here and there's something watching you. It is a scary place. Okay, go on. And you can see the rock formations. If you imagine this in the dark and everything, how this would work on your imagination. But yeah, no, I think there is a real spirit there. Okay, next one. You get the idea. And of course, all these valleys have got tombs in them as well, so it could well be one of the spirits of the tomb, because they come out, play around. Go on. I've been working, because of the people that I know and everything, I've been working with a particular class of spirits, just quickly, in this tradition called the Zar, spelled Z-A-R. And essentially they're just not Islamic. In fact, some of the more religious fanatics, when they see people practicing Zar trance, because it's a trance tradition, dance tradition, magical invocation thing, which claims to go back to ancient Egypt, they say that the Zar spirits are the jinn. But that's like to drag it down, if you like, to say, oh, well, they're just jinn, right? They're not, you shouldn't be dealing with those, right? You shouldn't be, either that's for women, or that's with a derogatory thing, maybe they're going to be nasty about it, or it's not Islamic, it's the Zar. So they're spirits from another time, they're spirits from the past age that people still work with. And dealing with these spirits, well, I suppose the shaitans are the closest you'll get to the European idea of a demon. So they could be, but the Zar spirits are not necessarily demonic. They can be. They possess people, and in order to get rid of the possession, you have to know their name, and you have to know a particular song cycle. You have to know a beat on the drum, which is their call. And rather than blasting them, you don't blast these spirits and destroy them, because that won't work anyway. That was tried in pharaonic times, that people were possessed by difficult spirits from the Sudan and from Nubia. They get all the powerful magicians in to try and blast them with all these blood-curdling spells, and it never worked. It made things worse. They kind of end up killing the person who was possessed. So they don't like to be blasted. You have to entertain them. And the thing they like is they like a good feast, lots of food, lots of alcohol and drugs, and all-night party of drumming and dancing and general craziness. Good stuff. The spirits most active at dawn, midday and sunset, which are called the two reds, which corresponds with the ancient Egyptian liturgical times of dawn, midday, sunset, which is standardized to 9 o'clock, midday, 3 o'clock. This is, if you use the standard timings, very, very nice timings actually. 9 o'clock in the morning, not so bad. 12 o'clock's not so bad. 3 o'clock at last service of the day, it's okay. But maybe if you're going to do it dawn, midday, sunset, the two reds, that's when the spirits are most active in this tradition. And if you're not a practitioner, you have to avoid doing certain things then. If you are a practitioner, that's when you work on them. There are two ways of dividing them into black spirits and red spirits. Black spirits, Aswad, are the things like the jinn, who are creatures of fire, and the shayatin, the shaitans. They are very, very troublesome, and you have to really know what you're doing to deal with those. They cause disease, and there's a specialist practitioner called a faqih who supposed to know all that, and he uses the 7 basic charms to do that. As I say, the shayatin are the closest you'll get to the European idea of demon. And just to confuse that, there's, as I say, there's also the pharaonic shaitan, which are the spirits of the tombs. Now, the red spirits, in Sa, we deal with what's called the red spirits. And because I'm into the god Set, Set being the ancient red god, obviously ears prick up when you say the red spirits. The red spirits, that must be for me, really. So the red spirit, which is why I've kind of connected the practice of Sa trance with the Setian mythos for all sorts of reasons now. It really makes sense that that is the ritual practice of the Setians. They don't all know this yet, but we've been kind of group people. When I say the Setians, obviously there's the Temple of Set who have, I should say, peace be upon them, or whatever the Temple of Set. I have good relationships with people in the Temple of Set and the Church of Satan, but I'm not a member of those groups, never have been. I kind of work in another group of Setian people who are kind of a little bit more left field, I would guess. And we've been working with Sa spirits and possession trance, using some of this stuff and combining this. See, if you take the spells of the Greek magical papyri, you've got to kind of, it makes sense to kind of enliven them in with some spirit trance work, rather than just speak them. There's a third class of jinn that cause incurable mental illness, and there's no practitioners who can deal with that. Right? You just have to just let it go. As I say, Sa trance is the exorcism cult, really, of Upper Egypt and Nubia and the Sudan. People think it's a women's mystery. It's certainly become one. It's become a sort of women's, associated with the women's movement and belly dancing and stuff like that. But it certainly isn't that in origin. It's mainly women who, for one reason or other, become possessed. Or maybe it's in the cultures, maybe women, if you go back to ancient times, women like parties. It's like Hathor is the kind of ultimate beer monster, really. She likes to stay up all night and get pissed and have fun and stuff. Oh, what's that? Secret sign? Okay. So even though it's now, right? I mean, so I talked about this a little bit with Susan Laybourne, who's got another view of Sa. But then she said, oh, it's a women's mystery. And I said, well, the musicians are all men. And she says, but they're all gay men. I said, well, they're still men, aren't they? You know? For a start, I don't believe that for a minute, right? That all the musicians who do the music for Sa trance are all gay. Why not? I have nothing against that, you know. I'm sure, you know, it's the same anywhere. But it just isn't true. Many of the musicians are men and women, you know, but certainly if you go back to the accounts of this in the 1930s, you will find men and women doing this form of possession trance, you know, and mixed groups as well doing it, which is very, very unusual. That Sa trance is a mixed group. I don't know if I got the picture. This is the god, what did I say? The god Hekar. the god of magic. I don't know why this is, because it's very. You can see why the Egyptians were really thought of as fantastic magicians, because their representation of the god of magic is. It tells you that magic is a god, right? Magic is a religion in ancient Egypt. Not that magic is the religion of ancient Egypt. It's their religion, magic, what we call magic. Much more elevated than what we do in many ways. But, okay, next slide, let's zip through them. Okay, I've shown that before. I'm trying to hope I got... Go on. These are pictures of decanal demons. From the pharaonic tradition, which are led by Set in one way or another. Okay, keep going. What is this book? And he said it's by someone called Ahmed Al-Buni. Had everybody heard of Ahmed Al-Buni? It's a name trip off the tongue, Ahmed Al-Buni. Ahmed Al-Buni is, whose name means the coffee bean, the bean. I think coffee, he must have drunk a lot of coffee, which is an Egyptian thing, of course. Ahmed Al-Buni is the kind of Aleister Crowley of medieval Islam, really. He's a real expert on magic, and it's his book that people use there. It's called The Source of the Essentials of Wisdom, the book. It's amazing. This guy said, oh, that's the source of the essentials of wisdom. And it's full of magical talismans, which if we could show you, you'd probably, maybe I'll just flick onto that just before we go, you'd recognize them. You would recognize what they are. We know them sort of secondhand from things like the Key of Solomon and from the Greek magical papyri. So what it shows is this book is a printed book, is still in use in Egypt, using the same techniques, and this is not just an academic, this is in use in Egypt in a very, very loaded situation. I'm not saying people do this, but you kind of have to think, what's the thing that you do in the grimoire? The primary task of the grimoire, one of the big things you would do in the grimoire is find treasure. Yeah, as I said. But we don't care about that because nobody ever finds any treasure in the West, do they?
Magic.
Yeah. They find little bits and pieces, but they don't really find treasure, right? Or at least, you tell me they did. If you're familiar with the Greek magical papyri, you'll see images like this. The Greek magical papyri, not as well done. So I'll finish on that. So Al-Buni, the trouble with Al-Buni is not translated into English anywhere yet. Huge compendiums of magical work, which which is amazing stuff. And this one, if you remember the first version of the talk, and the stuff, some of this stuff, right, is in the book Phi Netta. I'm not just plugging this, but it is there. And if you're familiar as well with the work of Nineveh Shadrach, Magic That Works, or whatever it is called, check out the works of Nineveh Shadrach. He has an idea about the sevenfold. I mentioned the 7 amulets, the 7 seals of the obviously the Book of Revelation I mentioned in our tradition, but in Islamic magic you use the 7 seals. You see this in this. So in this book, which was published before I received this, I sort of start talking about the magic of the 7 seals. So you have a basic magic of 7 seals, and saying how they first come into the Western tradition, and how you use these. And they have 7 seals, they have 7 sounds, 7 gestures, blah blah blah. Quite a complex system. Well, no, quite a simple system. Anyway, the interesting thing about 7 seals, they're not exactly Arabic. They're more like Egyptian hieroglyphs. And Al-Buni says that the 7 seals are a combination of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. So Islamic magic is interfaith. The Islamic magic of the medieval period is a combination of all religions. It's not like now. Anyway, so I'd said that, and then blam, through the post comes a talisman from a magical book in use in Luxor at this moment with the 7 seals on them. See, these are not Arabic. One of the ones you recognize, the pentagram. The pentagram is one of the most important magical seals within Islam and within Egyptian magic, in fact. It's one of the oldest magical sigils you'll find, and in other systems. And they make a magic square of the 7 seals. I don't know what the purpose of this is yet. I haven't translated it. But whatever, this is rather remarkable. So, some of them are from the Torah, and some of them are from the Book of Revelation. Although if you, I don't know if you read the Bible, but in the Bible it doesn't show you what they're like. So, I don't know, I thought my theory had come full circle, really. I started getting interested in the 7 seals, put onto that, and I discovered essentially a system of sorcery that uses late Egyptian hieroglyphs within the Islamic world. And that, I thought, was good. Thank you very much.
Right, do we have any questions from Mark?
Pictures of demons just now where a man's body and an animal head. I thought those were the gods. I don't know a huge amount about Egyptian.
That's not Egyptian, is it? The Pazuzu. Well, the Pazuzu is Mesopotamian, isn't it? But it's a good example of a monster, really, rather than a demon. Which is, if I can remember my own formula, it's a human head. So it's got a human head. You think it's a sort of doggy head. It's a human head on a kind of winged animal body. It's a bit human as well, but it's a monster, I think.
Would you class Thoth, Horus, and the Egyptian pantheons as demons?
Thoth.
Yeah, because they are depicted with an animal head. Horus, Sekhmet.
I know, yeah, no. Well, that's an interesting. Well, I'm not saying they're demons, but they're kind of composite beings, aren't they? Which and that idea of an animal head on a human body. If you go back to Lascaux and some of these really old Ice Age or after the Ice Age cave art, and you got those images. They are kind of this composite between human and animal. And lots of the early gods are kind of, they are that, I think. I mean, you think of Isis, the goddess Isis is really she's a bird goddess. And that's a very old image of, Isis is really a combination of a human being and some sort of bird. A bird that probably eats flesh. It's probably a flesh. Isis and Nephthys probably originally flesh-eating birds who ate corpses, or who made a noise whenever they saw a dead body, maybe like vultures, or maybe like crows or something. They kind of make that noise, and that's so. Maybe all of the gods have that origin as a composite creature. I don't know. Not that one. That's Set. See, Set is one of the weirdest of Egyptian constructions. Because you also got to think of Egypt, they're very, very good at depicting animals, and but it looks as if their human beings look a little bit cartoon-like. But it's obviously deliberate. There's obviously something deliberate about that, because it's not as if they don't know how to depict people really, really accurately. So all Egyptian art is very intentional. It's depicting something spiritual. But Set has got a... No, but there's all sorts of theories about what that is. Some people say it is a monster of some sort, to contradict myself, because he combines elements of biology that don't exist in the real world. He's dog-like, but then he's got these ears that no animal has got. But other people think it is an animal. But there you go.
Isn't one of the differences between demons and monsters that demons have an intelligence, however critical it is, and monsters are a bit dim? I think that is more of the division than just human head, animal body, and all the rest of it. Demons have an intelligence.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of putting it. Monsters are more like angels then. They're kind of sort of automata. But I got that idea from, I don't know if people are familiar with this thing called Göbekli Tepe, which is the oldest ritual temple yet discovered, with stone architecture and iconography. And the pictures from this place, which is in Turkey, they kind of fit with the Egyptian system as well, the pillars and the images. But the guy who excavated that, he looked at these images and he said it's his idea that demons are this way and monsters, and he says monsters don't exist before a certain time in our history when we had written records, in fact. So it's almost like when we got more intelligent and started writing books, the things that got us in our dreams were kind of more, we created something new that plagued us in our dreams. I don't know. It was just I thought it was an interesting idea to work with for a bit.
But, you know, when you're talking about, you say demons are animal heads, human bodies, so you talk about the images of the cave paintings like that. Isn't it more with the cave paintings that those are the magic practitioners and the shamans who are wearing the heads within a sympathetic magical practice to negotiate with the spirit of a particular animal that they don't wish to hunt?
Yeah, there is always a possibility. That's a theory, though, isn't it? That these images that are depicted in Göbekli Tepe and everything, they're supposed to be human practitioners donning spirit masks or animal masks, and sometimes they do find things that masks and everything. But I don't think it can be explained the whole. The excavator at Göbekli Tepe, they found so many of these things that he thought it couldn't all be depictions of human beings. That they are composite creatures. And I suppose then, when you could ask it the other way around, when a human practitioner wears an animal mask, then they are becoming that sort of composite creature, aren't they? They're becoming a kind of demon themselves, or a spirit, this weird creature, which is not human, and it partakes of both, of two worlds. Anything that gets you into two worlds at the same time, the animal and the human or whatever, is always magically powerful. But yeah, I think both things are going to be true, aren't they? There's probably are people who don animal, they do. It's like with that one, the Egyptian stuff, same thing. Are they masks? And sometimes they did wear masks, right? But then they usually tell you that it's a mask. The people who do the embalming of the corpses, they have to wear a mask with Anubis's head on and stuff. People in boxing, in fighting, when they're fighting each other in ritual combat, in festivals, they wear masks of all sorts of things. So they describe masks. But they also, I mean, the other complication with the Egyptian culture is that, and ancient culture, is that they worshipped the severed head. And the severed head has special magical meaning, which we don't completely know. So say Hathor, the image of Hathor, because we're used to portrait busts of Shakespeare or wherever it is as being just the head, we think, oh, it's just an artistic convention. They didn't have enough marble to do the rest of it. But that's now. But in the past, that didn't apply. When they depict just a head with no body, a headless creature, one way or another, or a disembodied creature, that is, and Osiris is often depicted as a severed head. Hathor is a severed head. Bez is a severed head. There's another mystery there about, and lots of other cultures have this cult of the severed head. The Celts had severed heads in their shrines also. So, in Hinduism, they like severed heads, or see the head of John the Baptist in Freemasonry, all this sort of stuff. It's not just an artistic convention, it means something that we can, I don't know what it means. Tell me what it means.
Thank you very much.